Hi, I'm Evan Anderson, a graduate student at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Chemistry.
And I'm Pete Carr, faculty member here at Minnesota for the past 38 years and 8 years before. And so I've got almost a half a century of experience working with graduate students. And we're going to be showing you a series of videos on how to write a successful resume. It's going to be broken up into 3 parts, so it'd be easy eating. And we hope you will get something valuable out of this to advance your career.
I'm looking to apply for an industrial career, and for that I know I need to have a resume ready. Can you tell me a little bit about what a resume is?
Sure. Okay, well, I believe that a resume is one of the more important documents that a graduate student or postdoc can write because it is going to launch your career in industry. So it's very important to understand what a resume is. And in my opinion, the best definition here is that the resume is an executive summary of your qualifications for a position that you're applying for. The reason I call it an executive summary is because some people confuse a resume with a curriculum vitae. There's a big difference between them. A curriculum vitae is really an in-depth report on all of your life experiences, your professional experiences, your educational experiences, almost everything you've done during your education. These are typically more useful for people in academia than they are in industry. And it's very important to understand that a resume is a short summary document. It's an executive summary. You have to understand that in industry, a given company might have a dozen positions that they're trying to fill at the PhD postdoc level, and they may have hundreds of applications for each of those positions. That means that the people looking over the resumes don't have that much time to look at them. They have to be short. Let me define that quantitatively. 2 to 3 pages, absolute maximum in length, unless there are some extraordinary things in your resume. The other thing I want you to understand that if your resume is not really good, that's probably the end of your application at that company. It's really just one strike and you're out. Does that make sense to you? The difference between the resume and the CV, and why it has to be short?
Yep, that sounds great. Good. Are there any guiding principles that you would give me for how to write a resume?
And the first principle relates to any document you write, and that is, who are you writing a document for? In the case of a resume, you're writing it for the decider, the person who says whether you go in the good pile or the bad pile, or maybe the maybe pile. And really what you're trying to tell this person is what makes you qualified, if not uniquely qualified, for the specific job that you're applying for. That's the first test. You have to understand that probably the first person who looks at this is simply pre-screening the applications for someone further up the chain of command, perhaps pre-screening for a manager. It could well be a PhD level person pre-screening. They probably are a PhD person pre-screening. So you've got to catch their attention with why you're qualified. That, in my opinion, would be really the first thing that first principle in writing a resume. The second principle is everything in the resume should address this first principle. And secondly, you must be prepared to ultimately discuss everything in your in your resume in depth at an interview. So you don't want to put things in there that don't belong. You absolutely want to put things in there to get their interest, that you are able to go into in much greater depth at a later time. That's very important.
So when I think about the specific content that I want to include in the resume, what would you recommend to begin with?
Well, there's two huge categories that have to be in the resume. One, certainly important, if not traditional and conventional, to start with your education. This you put at the top in the resume. You want to start with your most recent school or position. If you're a grad student in a PhD program, you start with that. If you're a postdoc, you start with that, and you work your way back through undergraduate school, and I think that's sufficient in most resumes. You really don't want to go any further back than that, unless there are some exceptional things in high school. For instance, if you made the National Honor Society or something like that, something that makes you outstanding academically, then you might go back to high school. The other big category is your professional or work experience. Later on in your career, you may be looking for a second job. Then, of course, you would talk about that second job, but it's also quite important to talk about your professional achievements. You have to understand that this document is going to be read by professionals, but perhaps with no expertise in your field. So you really want to strive to communicate. Another point of your resume is you don't want a long list of skills like NMR, FTIR, LC-MS. You want to be specific about your skills. You want to list things that you are a true expert at. As an example of what not to include, if you handed off even 10 or 20 samples for NMR to be run by a standard NMR data acquisition program, that does not make you an expert. On the other hand, for instance, if you maintained your group's FTIR instrument, fixed it, taught people how to use it, then that indicates a significant amount of expertise in the use of that technology. These are the things you want to list, the things that you really are expert at.